Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another quick Flutter tutorial. In this one, I'm going to show you how we can create a functional to-do app using Flutter. So I'll show you how we can check off each task and also create new tasks, as well as using a little slidable widget to delete the task as well. And then finally, I'll show you using Hive how we can store the data in your local device. And it's actually really simple to do, so let me show you by jumping into the code. So I've opened up a brand new Flutter project, and just to keep everyone on the same page, in my main function, I'm running my app, which brings us to this home page. And in this home page, I've just got a blank scaffold, so if you run this, you should just have a blank white app. And so this is where we'll begin. Now the first thing I'm going to do is, for the background color, let's make it a bit of a, say, yellow theme. So let's go with yellow 200. And then let's create an app bar, which if we save is going to be blue. And so instead of specifying the color individually in the app bar, let's actually just go back to the main.dart file and use this theme. So this will probably be a good idea, especially if you have multiple pages. So the primary swatch color, you can pick whatever theme you want to go for, but I'm just going to go with a yellow color. Okay, so that will automatically change the app bar as well as the floating action bar, which we'll use later. The default colors are going to be whatever we specified here. So that's good. And let's give the app bar a title, and I'm just going to say to do. And one other thing I like to do in the app bar is, you can see there's a bit of a shadow there, which personally I'm not a big fan of. So the elevation, let's make it 0. I kind of like this flat aesthetic to it. Cool. Now next thing is, in the body, we want to have a list view of tiles. So we want to have a few to-do tasks in a list. And so let's say, just for now, just to keep it simple, in the children, I'm going to have something called a to-do list, which we haven't created yet. So with this one, let's create it in a separate folder. So in my library, you can see I've got the main function, and I've got a pages folder, which currently we just have one page. And I want to create a new folder called utilities. So I'm just going to call it util. Sometimes I call it components. But essentially in here, let's create our to-do list, to-do tile. Okay, then we can import my material.dart and create a stateless widget called to-do tile. So before we create this tile, let's just go back to the home page, and you should be able to, oh, I called it to-do list. I want to call it to-do tile. You should be able to import what we just created. There it is. And if we come back to our to-do tile, we can encapsulate the code inside this folder. Okay, so this will keep our code nice and clean in the home page. So let's start with a child, just saying some tasks. So let's say make tutorial, which is what I'm doing right now. Here it is, but let's give it some decoration. And let's give it a color, and let's just go for a yellow color. Cool, so there it is. Now I'm just gonna put some padding around this container. Okay, so you can see now there's a bit of padding there, but maybe we could go for like 25. And then let's put some padding not outside the container, but within the container for the child. So let's say maybe 12. That's looking pretty good so far. Maybe 24. Yeah, I actually like that better. Cool, and you can see that the corners are very sharp, and you'll know I don't like sharp corners. So let's go to the border radius here, and let's make this 12. Okay, looking pretty good so far. Now, how about we include a checkbox next to this so that we can tick off a task, which means in the child of this container, we're going to have to wrap this in a row. Okay, so I'm just going to say, put some comment here. I'm going to say task name, and then let's put in a checkbox. So if you just start typing checkbox, you should see this default widget in Flutter. So you can see when we create a checkbox, we need to give it two properties. So the value and the onChanged. So the value being a boolean, so it's going to be a true or false value, like I did this task or I didn't do it. And then the onChanged allows us to switch between the two. So if we think about the to-do tile, right, and if I just kind of comment this checkbox out for a second, coming back to our home page, what I really want to do is I want to create multiple to-do tiles, right? And if you think about what changes between each tile, like what varies between each tile, it's going to be the task name and the value of each task, like if I've done it or not. And also we need it to create a method for when the user taps on a particular checkbox. So there's essentially three things that's going to vary between tile to tile. Okay, so that's what I'm going to create up here. So I'm going to say final string. The first thing is the task name. And then we also need to know the boolean. So task completed, right? This would be a true or false. And then the last thing is I need to have a method. So I'm going to have a function, and this is going to be a boolean, and we're going to call it onChanged because that's what this is called. So if you're not sure about what this stuff is, if you just hover over the onChanged, I'm just copying the type of method that they require. Okay, so these three things, let's create the constructor for these. So the first thing is the task name, and then we need to know if the task is completed, and then also we need to know what's the onChanged function. So let's get rid of this const tag, and now we can say, instead of just fixing it to be make tutorial, you can see it's going to replicate for each tile. Let's just say whatever the task name is. Same thing for the value. We now should be able to know what the task completed is, and the onChanged method we're going to give to the onChanged method. Cool, so what did we just do? If you come back to the home page, you can see that our to-do tile is a red squiggle because we have to fill these things out, right? So let's say the first task name, let's call it make tutorial, and then task completed, let's say true, and then onChanged. Now onChanged, we're going to create this method in just a second. So I'm just going to say do nothing right now. Okay, so if I save this, you can see here it is. So we have make tutorial. Now if I copy this and I create another one, I could say do exercise, and let's say this is false. Okay, so this is how we create different to-do tiles. Now one thing is this checkbox isn't clickable because, well, we fixed these values to be true and false, and we didn't specify the onChanged method. So let's do that now. Now let's create this onChanged method in just a second. And just before we do, instead of using a list view that has children and we have to specify like what the widgets are inside, let's make this a little bit more dynamic. And so what I mean is later I want to be able to have a plus button here so I can create new tiles and also delete new tiles. So it's not ever going to be whatever's inside the children. So I'm going to just get rid of this, and we're going to use a list view.builder. Okay, I've made a separate tutorial on focusing on list view builders, so check that out if you need, but I can show you real quick how to use it. First of all, let's come up to the top here and let's create a list of to-do tasks. Okay, so I'm going to say list to do list. Okay, and let's put in some default to do lists. And the way I want to structure this data is, first of all, let's have the task name. So I'm going to say make tutorial. And then the second part of this list is going to be a boolean to denote if it's been done or not. So let's say at the beginning it should be false because we haven't done it. And maybe let's create another one here and say do exercise, and this is also false. So the reason why we created this separate list is because now we can just use this list view builder and we can do some cool things. So say item count, we have to specify how many we want to build. So this one is going to be just the to-do list length, so however many we have inside. And now we can create the item builder. Let's grab this, and we're going to return a to-do tile, which is what we created earlier, right? And so now we can specify here. So the task name, so this is going to be to-do list, and we want whatever index we're looking at. So this index will go from 0, like 0, 1, 2, 3, for however many items we have. So for a particular index, let's get the 0th one. So that's going to be this. And then for the task completed, it will be the same thing, but number 1. So this is number 0, and then this is number 1. And for the onChanged, we haven't specified this yet. So let's say, let's create that now actually. And I don't know why it's called P0, this boolean. I'm just going to change this to be value. Okay, and let's call this checkbox changed. Okay, so let's create our method. So let's create our method here. So this is just for the checkbox was tapped. Okay, so let's create a void checkbox changed. And so if the user taps on the tile, then the value we can give to the checkbox changed. So let's actually accept this value. So I'm going to say boolean value. And also let's get the index. So which to-do task are we talking about, right? So that's controlled by this index. So now I can give it a value, and I can give it in an index. We should put a question mark here, some null safety. Cool, so if I tap on this, I want to be able to check this on and off, right? So let's set the state, and what we're going to change is this value here, or these values. So to-do list, which index are we looking at? Are we looking at this one, or are we looking at this one? And if you take number 1, so that's going to be these guys. Let's set it to be just the opposite of what we currently have. So I think this should work. So let's just refresh this. So if I check this off and on, you can see now we can tick this on and off. Cool. If you have any questions about what we just did, just ask below and I'll try to help out. Now, one thing about this, let's just go back to the to-do tile and just kind of clean up this decoration. I think that having a padding all the way around, the 25 all the way around, is not bad, but you can see it creates this kind of double 25. There's like 50 here. So I am a bit of a aesthetic creep, so I want to change this from all to only and just put it on every side except for the bottom side. So what that does is it just creates a nice uniform padding around all of these widgets. So that's good. Now the other thing is I want to change this checkbox active color. It's yellow, which is in theme with what we want to do, but let's make this a bit darker. So let's go to this checkbox and let's say and in the checkbox we should be able to see the active color, and let's actually go for black, to be honest. Yeah, that looks much better. And one other touch I want to do is, you know this text widget, right? I want to have a strike through. Like if I did do the task, we can show it with this checkbox, but let's also cross off this text. So if you look at the style, in the text style, the decoration, we can go for text decoration, line through. There you are. Cool. So right now I actually made it to be always a line through, but we want to kind of follow whatever this checkbox is doing, right? Which is good because we have this task completed boolean. So we can say, all right, in the decoration, depending on if the task is completed, if it's completed, let's put a line through it. If not, let's just copy this. And we should just be able to see a none option. Okay, so this boolean will control this for us. So let's check this out. Cool, if I check this, then it's a line through it. And if we uncheck it, then it's back to normal. Cool, so we want to kind of put a line through it to get that dopamine hit as we do these tasks, you know? Okay, cool. So in terms of our to-do app, it's looking pretty good so far, except for the fact that we can't add or delete a new task, right? So that's going to be the crucial bit of functionality we need. So let's focus on that one. So first of all, let's create a floating action button. So if I go below the app bar, you can start typing floating action button. And the widget is also called floating action button. And we have to specify on pressed. If I save it, there it is. Let's give it a child. So I want to have a plus button, maybe an add button. Yep, here it is. And so if I click on this, if I unpress it, what do you want to do? I want to create new task. So this method, let's come up here, create a new task. So void create new task. Now what I want to happen when I create a new task is I want to show a dialog box so that the user can input the name of the task. Okay, so we can say show dialog. And this is where we return an alert dialog. And so if I just save this, yep, there's nothing there because we didn't create it. Now, usually we can create it inside here, but again, just to keep our code nice and clean, let's create this in a separate folder. So this is where the util comes in handy. So in the utilities, let's say Dialog Box. I'm going to call it Dialog Box. And so we're going to return an alert dialog. And now we can come back here and we can say Dialog Box and press tab to auto import it. Okay, so this dialog box we're going to create in this file here. So let's have a look at what we're going to do. So in the content, let's create a container, maybe height of 200. And the alert dialog, let's give it a background color of yellow. So let's just restart this. And if I click this, cool, here it is. This is our little box that we want to have a text field now. So let's create a column and I'm going to create a text field. So get user input, and then also below that I want to have some buttons, like a save button and also a cancel button. Okay, so if I just save this, right now we just have a text field in there, so we can just type stuff in. Cool, so the text field, it's fine the way it is, but I like to have a border around it. So let's say in the decoration, input decoration, and you can see in the border I want to have a outline input border, which if you save, yep, I like this style, just having a border around it as opposed to just a line. Cool, and we can give it a hint text, or maybe that's inside the decoration. And this should be a string. Yep. So let's say add a new task. Here it is, and then if you click on it, you can start typing. And this yellow, actually, let's make this a little lighter. Cool. Okay, looking good. Now, below that, we're going to have a row of buttons. Okay, so I want 2 buttons, a save button, and then a cancel button. So these buttons, let's actually create another separate file so that we can reuse this button widget. I'm just going to call it my button. Cool, and when we think about creating this button, what are the 2 things that we need? We need to know the button's name, right? And we also want to know the onPressed. And so for this one, I'm going to use a void callback, which is it's a gesture detector, like it's a method, but it's going to return nothing. Okay, so remember in the other one we returned a boolean. This one is just going to be a void, and let's call it onPressed. And let's create these constructors. And the button itself, we can actually use a material button here. And so the onPressed is going to be whatever we create in the other page. And the child is going to be a text widget, because this is just a widget. And let's just give it the text. Cool, and the color of it, let's use the theme. So theme of context, color, primary color. Okay, so now that we created a little button, let's come back to our dialog box. Let's say my button. And so here it is. Let's press tab to auto import it. And the text, the first one, I want it to be a save button. And on the onPressed, let's just execute nothing for now. And let's create another one down here saying cancel. Cool, so here's our 2 buttons. Now I actually want to have it more on the right hand side. I want to have it like on the end. And also this column, let's space evenly. Cool, and actually we want to have a bit of a gap here. So I'm going to put in a constant sized box, width of just 4, I guess. Yeah, I just want a bit of a gap there, maybe 8. Now when the user types some stuff in here, how do we access this bit of text? Well, let's go to our text field, and you can see that there is a controller. So we can give it a controller. Now I want to be able to access this controller in my home page, so I'm just going to create the controller as a constructor. So when you create this text field, you need to give it a controller. And we can give this controller to this guy. And so what we did is, if you come back to the home page, you can see that the dialog box has a red squiggle because we have to give it a controller. So I'm going to create my text controller. So I'm just going to say controller is text editing controller, and give this controller to this guy. Cool, so this would give us access to whatever we type in here. Now we need to create the method for save and cancel. Okay, so coming back to our dialog box, right now if I press save and I press cancel, it executes nothing. So let's create the methods here, right? So let's say void callback on save, void callback on cancel, require this on save, require this cancel, my boy. Let's get rid of this constant tag. And this method, let's pass through to this guy. Cancel method, give to this button. So again, what did we just do? We now, coming back to our home page, our dialog box has a red squiggle because we need to create these two methods. So on save, let's say just save new task, which we haven't created. And on the cancel, we could create a new method, but this one is just going to execute one line of code. So I'm just going to say navigator.of pop. And what that does is it just dismisses this dialog box. For this one, we'll create a new method though. Now, when we click save, so let's say code, and when I click save, I want to do a couple things. If I just set the state, I want to add whatever's in here into this list. Okay, so let's say to-do list.add, and we're going to add a list because the first thing is going to be the controller and the text in the controller. So remember, the controller is what we can use to access this bit of text. Cool, and if you're going to add a new task, then obviously you haven't completed the task, right? So let's just say it's false for the boolean. Cool, and let's see how this looks. So if I say add a new task, let's say code a new app, and I hit save, you can see actually behind it, if you look carefully, it created the new task, but I want to dismiss this damn box. So let's say navigator dot of context and just pop it. Okay, so let's just restart this again. Code new app, hit save, dismisses the dialog, and we just added a new task to this list. Cool, and actually one last thing is if I click this button again, it still says code new app, which we want to clear. So go to the controller and just clear it. Okay, sweet. So now we can add new tasks, right? Like let's just add this, and let's say code app, and we can keep adding this stuff. Now let's actually have a way to remove a task. So obviously we can check off the checkbox and say we did it, but maybe we want to be able to just delete it entirely. So this one, what we're going to do is if I go back to my to-do tile, I know a perfect widget for this. If you go to your pubspec.yaml, let's just include one dependency because this will make our app feel nice and good. Under the Cupertino icons, it's called Flutter Slidable. And we're going to go with version number, let's go with 1.2.0. So again, I made a separate tutorial covering just this slidable widget. So check that out if you need, I'll link it below. But I can show you here real quick what we need to do. So save this pubspec YAML and close it. And now go to the container of our to-do tile. So that's just this tile here. And we're going to wrap this container in a widget called slidable. There it is. So what this does is you can actually specify this end action pane. There's a start action pane and an end action pane. So that just means, are you dragging from the left or are you dragging from the right? So I want to drag from the right, the end. And here we're going to give it an action pane. And if you're ever curious, just hover over this to see what it requires. You can see motion, and I need to give it children, right? For the motion, if you look at the actual package, there's a few different animations I guess you could go for. And the one I want to go for is just a stretch motion. And then the children. So in the children, so if you slide, you can have multiple options, but I just want to have one option. So slidable action. And then the point of this slidable action is to delete this task. So I'm going to say a delete function is what we need to do. And we need to give it an icon. Let's go with that bin. And also maybe a background color. Let's go with like a red. Cool. So if I come up here, every time we create a to-do tile, we need to give it a task name, a boolean of if the task is completed or not, and this onChanged just to check this on and off, right? Now let's create one more function, which if you hover over the onPressed, it wants this type of function. So function build context, and I called it a delete function. Okay, so let's make sure to require that as well. And so if I come back to my home page now, we should have a red squiggle somewhere. on this to-do tile, so the delete function. What should happen if we delete it? I don't know why it's called PO, but I'm just going to change the name of it to be context. And let's create a new task called delete task, which we haven't created. So we have a create new task. Let's also have a delete task. So void delete task. And we actually want to know which task we're looking at. So let's require an index, right? So is it 0, 1, 2, or 3? Let's give it the index. And the way to delete a task is basically to just remove it from this list, right? So let's say set the state and to-do list dot remove, and I want to go for remove at, because this is going to require an index, which we already gave it. So let's check this out. Let's restart this motherfucker. Okay, so we've got these two things, and actually let's check this. Hey, there it is. So you can, this is what the slidable widget does. Again, it's super sharp, and I hate sharpness. Let's come back to the slidable action, and it's already got a border radius property, my man. All right. That's what I'm talking about. Cool, so these were the default tasks that we always gonna have when we open up the app, right? But now we can just delete it. And we can have no tasks at all, which is good. This will be a nice functional standalone app. Cool, so our app looks like it's working pretty well. But one thing you'll realize is, let's say I add a new task here. And so I've got 3 tasks, but if I close this app completely and open it again, it's just going to come to the default. So it doesn't have any memory. So that's why we're going to use the Hive local database so that we can store some of this information on the phone. So I've made a separate tutorial on Hive itself, so check that out. I'll link it below. But I can show you real quick how we can use this in our to-do app. So the first thing is to go to your pubspec.yaml and let's add the dependencies in. So you've got to add these 2 dependencies. There's this Hive and also the Hive Flutter. And we actually also need to add it under these dev dependencies. So again, check out my Hive tutorial for more detail. This is just straight from the documentation. And we have to do a little bit of setting up. So if you go to your main function, let's initialize the Hive. So let's start typing Hive. And if you click, let's import the library we just put in our pubspec YAML. And you should be able to see this init Flutter. Cool, and we actually also need to make this function asynchronous, and we can await this. So that's how we initialize Flutter, and we also need to open the box, or I guess open a box. So we can say like var box await Hive open box, and here we can create a new box. So we can call it whatever you want. Let's just say my box. And so if you come to our home page, if you ever need to reference this box, you can say we can store it in a variable. So like final my box is Hive, and then we can open the box. So let's make sure to import Hive here as well. Cool. Now, while we're doing some database work, let's actually create a new file. Create a new folder here called just data. And let's create a new file called database.dart. And in this, I'm going to create a new class. So to do database. Okay, so let's separate our homepage UI from the database related stuff. Okay, so let's reference the box as we did earlier. And we're going to need to import Hive here as well. Let's open the box, which we created my box. When it comes to this to-do list, so this make tutorial and do exercise is the default tasks that we can have when the user first opens the app in the history of the app, like the very first time. So this is going to be the default information, right? So I'm actually going to say, let's say like list to do list. And let's just start with an empty list here. And without doing any more customization, I actually want to now delete this list. But all of our other code requires us to work with our list, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say to do database, and I'm going to create an instantiation of our database. So to do database, I'm just going to call it DB for database. And we can create an instance of this class. Okay, so we're going to have this to-do list that we can access. So all of these red squiggles of the to-do list we had before, you can just put DB and a dot in front of it. Okay, so this is the sort of overall to-do list we can use. Okay, now we need three methods here. So the first one is create initial data. So this is going to be used if run this method if this is the first time opening this app. First time ever opening this app. Okay, and if this is the first time opening this app, let's just say to-do list is, and let's put our default tasks. So make tutorial and it's false. Do exercise and it's also false. So if this is the first time the user has ever opened up the app, then let's just show these default tasks, just to give the user idea on what this app is actually doing. Now the other method is we need to load the data from the database, right? So void load data. And just before we fill this out, we also need to update the database. Okay, so if the user makes any changes, we also want to update it in our Hive database. Okay, so if this is the first time running the app, then the to-do list is going to be these two tasks. Now, anytime after the first time the user opens it, it would mean that we already have some information in our database, right? So let's say to-do list equals to my box.get. Oh, actually, I made a little mistake. The Hive open box, we just need to say box when we reference it. Yeah, we don't need to open the box. So in the main file, we'll open the box, and then in our code, if I want to reference the box, we can just say hive.box. So now we can say in our load data, to-do list is equal to my box, and let's get the to-do list. So the way Hive works, like I said, I'm going to link my separate tutorial for Hive below, but the way it works is it's like a key value pair. And so we can call the key to-do list, and then it will return our to-do list. And same thing with the updating the database. Like if I make any changes, if I check these off, then that means our to-do list would have changed. And so I want to update the database. So let's say my box.put, and then for this key, I'm going to put in the to-do list. Okay, so it goes two ways. We can update the database, and then we can also get the data from our database. Okay, so how does this actually work? So now that we've set up these three basic methods, if we come back to the home page, what we really need to do is to look at the init state. So the initial state. So when the app first runs, we have to do a couple checks. Okay, so I want to say if this is the first time ever opening the app, then create default data. Right, so how do we do this check? Well, let's just reference the box and we're going to check in my box, and let's get this key value. Now if this is null, right, if there's nothing in there under the to-do list, then that means we've never stored any information. So this is the first time ever opening the app. So if that's the case, then let's just go to the database and create initial data, which will execute this and give us some default data. And then else there already exists data. So this is not the first time that the user has opened the app. Then I can say database and just load the data. Okay, and this will execute this function, and it'll go to the my box, and if there's something in the to-do list, then let's put it in our list here. Cool, and then finally we have to update the database. So this is kind of going from our app session data to giving it to our Hive database. And so I actually want to execute this anytime the user makes a change. So anytime, like if the checkbox happens or they add a new task, anytime the user makes an interaction, then let's update the database. Okay, so the checkbox was changed, then let's update the database. Save a new task, update the database, and create new task, we're good. If we delete, then update the database. Awesome, so this should work. So I'm going to, let's restart this. Cool, so this is the first time opening the app. So let's just say I'm going to check these off and let's see if it remembers. Hey, and there it is. So it stores the memory. So if I have a new task, and I create it here and I kill this app and I open it again, it's still in the memory. So this is how we use some local database storage to make our app more functional. So that's pretty much it. So I'll make sure to link this code below in my GitHub so you guys can check it out. So play around with it and let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to help you out. But other than that, thanks for watching and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.